Guardians of the Blade, by Adalene Martis. Chapter 20, I Swear. Nyra and Therak's life-mate ceremony was a much more muted affair than he felt she deserved. Normally, both families would be invited. Urmah families could be quite large. In addition, Therak was also a distant cousin of his king. Carrying a tiny sliver of royal blood meant that the ceremony would have been quite grand, especially since he was a sentinel. She should have had a military escort and aircraft flying overhead trailing colored smoke. She should have been showered with gifts from friends cheering and wishing them a happy life together. Instead, he was only able to offer her a handmade meal and a telescope that had been owned by the previous chief engineer. The ceremony was held in their bedroom and was little more than a simple exchange of promises to support each other in hard times and to take no other mates. However, that didn't mean it wasn't fun. Nyra made crowns of flowers for their daughters to wear, and Therak sang his favorite epic about an honorable Urmah warrior who became the ancestor of the feline cats. As he sang, Nyra danced with him while the cubs watched. Then they all wanted turns dancing with Marome and Popper. That night, the members of their pride laid down and groomed each other on the carpet, made of animal furs that he had hunted. For the first time since Therak had arrived at the facility over 35 years ago, the cold metal walls felt like home. The facility stayed on that fertile planet for over a year. The cubs grew quickly and enjoyed exploring the tall grasses. They also learned the joys of biting parasites and large flying creatures that wanted to eat them. However, with Popper Therak on duty, no creature survived the attempt to touch his beloved babies. Their time in the fertile plains and lush forests had been idyllic, but Therak knew it couldn't last forever. One morning, as the sun cast a golden hue over the grasslands, an alarm blared throughout the facility. The sharp sound echoed off the metal walls, jolting both Therak and Nyra into immediate action. Engine status, fully charged. Relocation recommended. Estimated time to departure, 1 hour. The automated voice announced. Therak's eyes met Nyra's, a mutual understanding passing between them. "We need to prepare for takeoff," he said firmly. Nyra nodded. "I'll secure our stuff and gather the cubs. You handle the captain duties and the safety seats," she said. They moved swiftly, months of forethought guiding their actions. Supplies were packed, essential equipment was stowed, and the safety seats they'd made the cubs were checked and double-checked. The cubs watched with wide eyes as their parents hurried about, sensing the urgency in the air. In the control room, Therak and Nyra had modified the adult-sized harnesses to fit the cubs, crafted from sturdy strips of leather. The harnesses were designed to keep them safe during takeoff, their first launch into the unknown. "Come on, little ones," Nyra coaxed gently, ushering the cubs into the control room. Nora, Ruem, Meaum, Keran, and Lyra followed hesitantly, their tails flicking nervously. One by one, they were fastened into their harnesses, secured snugly into seats adapted for their small forms. "Marome," little Maum mewled, his eyes bright with curiosity. "Yes, exciting, isn't it?" Nyra assured him. Therak raised a brow at the exchange, then took his position at the main console, his fingers flying over the display as he urged the computer to make the takeoff as gentle as possible. The engines began to hum, a low vibration building beneath their feet. A panicked mewing broke through the rumble building beneath their feet. Little Lyra's eyes were wide with fear, her tiny body trembling against the restraints. She let out a plaintive cry, her gaze fixed on Therak. He glanced at her but hesitated. Lyra needed to get stronger. She was always clinging to him. He turned his attention back to the console, his jaw set. "Therak," Nyra said softly, her eyes pleading as she looked at him. He sighed, his expression softening. Without another word, he unbuckled himself and moved swiftly to Lyra's side. Gently releasing her from the harness, he scooped her up and cradled her against his chest. "It's all right, Lyra," he whispered soothingly. She buried her face into his mane, her small hands clutching tightly. Her trembling subsided as she nestled close, comforted by his familiar scent and steady heartbeat. Returning to his seat, Therak settled Lyra in his lap and secured them both with the harness. Nyra watched them with a tender smile. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. He gave a small nod, focusing back on the controls. "Engines are ready," he announced. "Everything's green over here," Nyra confirmed from her station. The facility began to vibrate more intensely as the engines powered up. Outside the viewport, the serene landscape of the plains stretched out, a patchwork of greens and golds under the clear sky. Therak silently said goodbye to the place that had been their home for a year, where they had formed their pride and become a family. Initiating liftoff in 3, 2, 1, the computer intoned. The ship surged upward, the force pressing them back into their seats, despite the inertial dampeners. The cubs mewled and chirped in terror, all except for Karen, who giggled with excitement, their eyes wide as the ground fell away beneath them. Lyra clung to Therak, her face buried in his fur. "Popper," she whispered, peeking out from his mane to watch the clouds envelop them. Kieran continued to squeal with joy, his tail twitching with excitement. His bravery made Therak swell with pride. Breaking through the atmosphere, the inky expanse of space unfolded before them, stars glittering like scattered jewels against the velvet darkness. "Engaging hyperspace jump," the computer announced. Nyra's fingers danced over the controls, inputting commands. "What are you doing?" Therak asked. "A moment," she snapped. Suddenly, lines of code with telemetry data flew across all the displays. It scrolled so rapidly that Therak couldn't make any sense of it. Seconds later, the screen went blank. Before Therak could figure out what had happened, a brilliant flash enveloped the ship as they entered hyperspace. The stars stretched into luminous streaks before dissolving into swirling blue and purple hues. The hum of the engines settled into a steady rhythm, the ship gliding smoothly through the cosmic tunnel. After a short while, they emerged from hyperspace. Before them loomed a magnificent ocean planet, its surface a mesmerizing tapestry of deep blues and swirling white clouds. Two suns orbited around each other far in the distance, a binary star system casting golden and silver hues across the watery world. Nyra gazed at the planet, her eyes reflecting the shimmering light. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Then her brow drew tight. "But where is it going to land?" Therak tapped the console, trying to get the display to come back. "The facility will submerge underwater and hide," he explained calmly. "I've been to this planet a couple of times before." She turned to him, surprised. "You have?" she asked. "Yes," he nodded. "The oceans are rich with fish if we need supplies. But it's best to stay inside. There are large creatures in the depths, ones we don't want to encounter," he said. Nyra raised an eyebrow. "Large creatures? You're not usually one to shy away from a challenge," she said. He gave her a stern look. "Trust me, these aren't the kind of challenges we want. Anyway, can you get the display back?" he asked. She considered his words, then nodded. Nyra set about negotiating with the AI, while Therak watched out the viewport as they descended toward the planet's surface. The cubs stared at the viewport as well, their faces filled with awe. "Brew!" Ruim exclaimed. "Yes, that's right, Ruim," Therak replied enthusiastically. That planet is blue. The ship descended smoothly, piercing through the planet's atmosphere. Wisps of clouds parted as they approached the vast expanse of ocean below. The suns cast shimmering patterns across the water, creating a dazzling display of light. The display came back online. "Got it?" Nyra cheered. "Great." Therak pressed on the display, double-checking the bulkheads were all green just in case. "All seals are secure," Therak confirmed. The ship touched the surface with barely a ripple, then began to sink gracefully beneath the waves. Water rushed over the viewport, the light shifting to a cool, muted blue as they descended. Schools of iridescent fish darted past, their scales reflecting flashes of color. "Popper," Nora whispered, her eyes suddenly uncertain. Therak unbuckled himself, and he collected her as well, letting her sit on his arm next to her sister. Lyra peeked out from Therak's mane. Upon seeing her sister, she latched onto her and started purring. Then they began grooming each other for comfort. Eventually, the facility came to a stop. "Looks like we're stabilizing at a depth of 50 meters, Nyra said, monitoring the readings. A display saying, "Engaging cloak," scrolled across the screen. Nyra looked over at Therak. "Cloaking?" He nodded. "This facility has some advanced capabilities. Cloaking uses more power but will make us virtually undetectable. Useful when you're on a planet with creatures that can crack the hull of your craft." Nyra's eyes turned round. "You weren't joking earlier." He shook his head, settling into their now underwater abode. The Pride took a moment to absorb the tranquil beauty surrounding them. Therak and Nyra put the cubs onto the ledge of the viewport to watch the fish swim by. The cubs were entranced as they pressed their faces against the transparent surface. Gentle currents rocked the ship ever so slightly, creating a soothing motion. Nyra stood by Therak, glancing at the myriads of marine life outside. "It's like another world down here," she mused. "It is, in fact, another world," said Therak, deadpan. Nyra poked him in the side and hissed at him lightly. He tried to grab her hand to love her a bit, but she pulled it out of his grasp, a petulant look on her face. The denial of affection stung more than he wanted to admit. "What else should I know about this planet?" she asked. He paused thoughtfully. "The most important thing to note is that some species here are as large as our facility. It's crucial, if one of them swims past, that we remain as silent as possible." She nodded, taking him seriously. It must have been hard for her to conceptualize a creature that large. It was for him, until he saw one of the creatures himself. "It's not all bad, though," he added. "We can dehydrate some high-quality salt, and the fish here are also really delicious." Her eyes lit up. "The foodie in me is intrigued," he smiled. "I thought you might be." The cubs began to mewl excitedly among themselves, pointing out various creatures that drifted by. Bioluminescent organisms glowed softly in the depths, casting ethereal light patterns. Kieran pounced against the viewport as a fish swam by and glanced back at his mother hopefully. Nyra chuckled. "I think you better learn how to swim first," she said. "Don't encourage him," said Therak. Therak watched Kieran as he pressed his hands and nose against the viewport, eyes wide with fascination at the swirling marine life outside. Bioluminescent creatures drifted by, leaving trails of shimmering light in their wake. The other cubs mimicked their brother, tiny prints from their hand pads, smudging the glass as they pointed and mewled excitedly. Eventually, however, they seemed to lose interest. Ma'um and Ruim yawned, their earlier excitement giving way to fatigue. Nora toddled over to Nyra, rubbing her eyes sleepily, but Kieran stood his ground, his gaze still fixed on the mesmerizing display outside. "It's time to rest, little ones," Therak announced gently, stepping forward to gather them. "Let's go, Kieran," he urged softly, reaching out to pick him up. "No," Kieran protested, his tiny voice firm, surprising Therak. Apparently he'd heard the word often enough that he knew how to use it well. Kieran twisted away, his claws flashing as he struggled to stay by the viewport. Therak sighed, taken aback by the sudden defiance. Before he could respond, Nyra stepped in. "Kieran," she called, her voice soothing. "Come to Mama. Be a good boy." Kieran paused, his ears perking up at her tone. He looked up at his mother, the stubbornness fading from his eyes. "Come on, my whittle snuggle-wug," she cooed as she encouraged him with a warm smile. He hesitated for a moment longer, then allowed her to scoop him up. Despite being the biggest of the cubs, he nestled comfortably in her arms, his head resting against her shoulder. The transformation was immediate. He went from resistant to content in an instant. Therak watched with a mixture of amusement and admiration. "You have a magic touch," he remarked. Nyra winked at him. Together they carried the cubs to their room, unstowed the furs, and laid them out to make the area comfortable. Nyra placed the datapad in the center of the makeshift carpet. With a few taps, an animation of colorful fish swimming across the screen came to life. The cubs gathered around, their fatigue momentarily forgotten as they became engrossed in the moving images. "Fish," said Nyra, pointing to the screen. "Fish?" Nora exclaimed, clapping her tiny hands. Lyra watched her sister for a moment. However, still tired, she flopped over and curled up for a nap. Ruam and Maum giggled, trying to paw at the fish as they swam by on the screen. Kieran leapt full body atop the datapad, knocking his smaller siblings out of the way, which earned him an earful of mewling from Maum. It was interesting to watch. Therak was curious to see how the power dynamics in his cubs would work out. But he was pulled away by Nyra. She leaned closer to Therak, her breath warm against his ear. "Is there somewhere in the facility where the computer can't hear us?" she whispered. Therak raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. He whispered back, "The showers. There's no microphones in there." She nodded subtly. "Perfect." Leaving the cubs engaged with the datapad, they quietly slipped out of the room. The corridors were quiet, the soft hum of the facility's systems, their only accompaniment. As they reached the communal shower area, Nyra entered first, her movements purposeful. Therak followed, closing the door behind them. The room was spacious, the walls lined with gleaming metallic tiles that reflected the soft overhead lighting. Nyra walked over to the shower valve and turned on the flow. Water cascaded down from multiple fixtures, the gentle spray filling the air with a fine mist. He watched her with a puzzled expression. "Why did you turn on the water?" Nyra turned to him, placing a finger gently against her muzzle in a gesture of silence. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We need to make sure it thinks we're actually taking showers," she explained, her eyes scanning the room as if looking for secret devices. Therak's confusion deepened. "Why all the secrecy?" She leaned in, her whiskers brushing lightly against his. "Because," she began softly, "the way the ship is moving isn't random." He blinked, processing her words. "What? How?" "I analyzed the telemetry data," she continued, her eyes focused. "There are no random variables in the calculations. The recent worlds we've visited have also been excluded from potential landing sites. It seems the facility is always heading to the closest habitable world, with certain exceptions." Therak frowned, his mind racing. "But the AI is programmed to move randomly to avoid detection. That's what my superiors told me." Nyra shrugged. "Maybe they lied, or maybe it got lazy," she said. "Either way, if we can predict its pattern, we might be able to determine where we are in the quadrant and where we're headed next." Her eyes shone with excitement at the prospect. I still need to run more calculations, but I believe it's possible. He considered her revelation. So, you didn't want it to hear us because you're worried it will change its pattern if it knows we're on to it. Exactly, she confirmed. If the AI becomes aware that we can predict its movements, it might alter its course or restrict our access to data. Therak rubbed his chin thoughtfully. I see. But I'm not sure how this will help us. The facility always seems to land in uninhabited areas, and I still have a duty to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Nyra met his gaze, her expression exasperated. Therak, you said it yourself. I'm the only one who's found this facility in 35 years. Space travel has evolved. Most ships rely heavily on instruments and automated systems. With the facility's cloaking system, the chances of someone stumbling upon this place are slim. The only reason I found it is because I didn't have the money to buy expensive scanners or an AI pilot. I flew manually and used my own eyes to scan the planet's surface. The only reason I found this place was because I got lucky. Nyra's voice trailed off, seeming a little surprised about those last few words coming out of her mouth. He reached up and stroked her cheek with the back of his hand. Lucky, huh? She stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. Yeah, I got lucky, she whispered, resting her head against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as the sound of the running water enveloped them. For a moment the worries and uncertainties faded away, replaced by the simple warmth of their connection. Therak considered her words. You want to find a new home. She looked up at him, her eyes full of worry. We have a family to think about, Therak, she said. Our replacement parts won't last forever. I can fabricate filters and other basics, but the delicate stuff is beyond what I can make here. No matter how skilled I am, I can't keep this place running forever. I don't want my babies growing up to be wild cats, or worse, getting stranded and dying slowly in space. Wild cats. The term gave Therak a shiver, conjuring up images of primitive Urmah, who could barely talk and could easily overpopulate an area until they consumed every piece of meat and then starved. If isolated enough, they would even interbreed within their own prides. It wasn't a pleasant thought. All right, he said softly. You have a good point. But promise me, if we get back to civilization, no one can ever know about this facility. She looked up, meeting his eyes. I promise, she said. Therak grabbed her shoulders and squeezed lightly. I'm serious, Nyra, he said with a hint of desperation. Even if someone threatens your life, my life, or the lives of our cubs, you must never tell anyone about this place or how to find it. Swear to me. They stood there in tense silence, the mist from the showers creating a cocoon around them. I swear, she said. Can I really trust you when you say that? Would you sacrifice anything rather than give any leads about the location of this place? He asked. I'm not making an empty promise, she said. The reason I knew about the B.L.A.D.E wasn't just because of history class. It's because my government was still looking for it. The bounty to find information on this place was so much that all scavengers were looking for it. A single sighting could set you up for life. Therak furrowed his brow. Why would they offer so much? Because the B.L.A.D.E is what your king used to negotiate a peace where the Pharaon didn't lose any territory to the Federation planets. He and all of his staff, who knew of the facility's movements, committed suicide rather than be taken prisoner. But before they died, they warned that if any Pharaon planets were invaded, that the B.L.A.D.E would come crashing down on the Federation home worlds. She said, I have no doubt that if this place was discovered that the situation would get worse for the Pharaon. And to be honest, I kind of fell in love with Pharaon culture when I fell for you. I don't think that a people who produced a male like you deserves to be wiped out, like some cats say. So I swear I'll never let information slip about this place, no matter what happens." "Thank you," he said. "If we manage to leave this place," said Nyra, "we will shave your mane and say you were a deserter in the war." "But—" Therak started to protest as he contemplated the enormous amount of shame that would bring him. "No buts," said Nyra with a paw on her hip. "Your mane is too conspicuous. Almost everyone with ties to the nobility were interrogated after the war. I mean it. They would bring in a Torthans and a tribunal at the slightest hint of someone having any knowledge of this place. If anyone figured out you were a sentinel, or that you were recognized by the late king, the resulting interrogation could put Pheran planets in jeopardy." After a few moments, Therak sighed. It stung, but Nyra had obviously put a lot of thought into this. "Okay," he said with resignation. He felt he could trust her with the secret. Therak stared at the water for a moment and let it wash the uncomfortable feelings away. A playful glint entered his eyes. "We should probably at least pretend to shower," he teased. She smiled. "Well, we are here." She flicked a few droplets of water at him with her tail. "Race you to the soap?" He grinned, the tension easing. "You're on."